This is the story of Stuttgart 21. It is a railway megaproject that has been completely overwhelmed by extreme hubris, geological nightmares, and technical chaos and has become a profound national embarrassment. Imagine planning a simple home renovation that costs 5 times the original estimate, destroys the foundation of your house, and takes decades longer than promised. Now, multiply that disaster by the scale of an entire major European metropolis. Germany, the gold standard of global engineering, a nation that is universally respected for its uncompromising efficiency, surgical precision, and vast, flawless infrastructure. When the world sees the label "Made in Germany," it expects absolute perfection. But buried beneath the wealthy, bustling streets of Stuttgart in the south of the country lies an €11 billion catastrophe that is actively destroying that legendary reputation piece by piece. Today, the official cost stands at an astonishing €11.5 billion, and even that figure is probably inaccurate. For years, Deutsche Bahn, the German national railway company, promised the anxious public that the final opening date would be December 2026. It was a hard deadline. It was a promise to end the seemingly endless construction work that had turned the city into a permanent dusty crater. But then the unthinkable happened. The 2026 opening date was quietly and unceremoniously scrapped. The grand unveiling was cancelled. The vision of a functional, state-of-the-art transport hub disappeared into the darkness of unfinished tunnels. Today, we are going deep underground to dissect the anatomy of this colossal failure. We will reveal the extreme arrogance of the original design, the terrifying rock-crushing geology that the engineers tried desperately to ignore, and the catastrophic digital signaling failure that ultimately caused the project to collapse. This is not just a story about delayed trains, it's a story about what happens when blinding ambition collides with the unforgiving laws of nature and loses. To grasp the madness of Stuttgart 21, we must consider what was destroyed. For nearly a century, the city was perfectly served by the Paul Bonatz building, a massive, iconic above-ground terminus station. It was highly functional. It featured 16 wide, easily accessible platforms. Trains came in, stopped, and went back out. This classic, proven design efficiently handled hundreds of thousands of passengers every week. However, the urban planners of the 1990s had a different, far more radical vision. They looked at the vast expanse of elevated tracks dividing the city center and saw wasted space. Their proposal was breathtakingly ambitious. They proposed tearing up the historic 16-platform terminus and moving the entire station deep underground. The tracks would be rotated exactly 90 degrees to turn it into a subterranean through station. The political promises were intoxicating. By burying the trains, they claimed they could free up 100 hectares of prime, sunny real estate in the heart of a crowded valley city. They would also connect Stuttgart directly to a new high-speed rail line to Ulm, slashing travel times across Europe. It sounded like the ultimate urban utopia. But there was a massive, glaring catch. To fit the new through station into the tight and complex underground geography of the valley, its size had to be reduced. They were replacing a reliable 16-platform station with an experimental underground cavern containing only 8 platforms. This drastic reduction in physical capacity was terrifying. The engineers insisted that modern technology and faster train turnaround times would compensate for this. They were effectively betting the entire future of southern German transit on a theoretical mathematical model with zero margin for error. The public immediately recognized the extreme danger. They saw an extremely expensive vanity project that would disrupt their city for decades just to create luxury real estate for developers. The resistance was fierce and culminated in the infamous Black Thursday of September 2010. Peaceful protesters, including students and the elderly, formed blockades to protect the historic parkland earmarked for destruction. In response, the political establishment deployed massive police forces, using water cannons and pepper spray against their own citizens. The brutal images shocked the nation. The project lost its social mandate in a single afternoon. Yet despite public outrage and glaring mathematical warnings about the 8-platform bottleneck and independent audits warning of severe cost overruns, the political machinery refused to stop. The contracts were signed. Prestige was at stake. The point of no return had been crossed. They began digging into the earth beneath Stuttgart, and that is when they woke up the monster. The city sits atop a highly specific and notoriously volatile rock formation known as the Gipskuper. Hidden deep within this ancient geological layer is a substance that gives civil engineers nightmares. It is a highly unpredictable, highly destructive rock called anhydrite. To understand why anhydrite is so dangerous, you need to understand a simple but devastating chemical reaction. In its natural undisturbed state deep underground, anhydrite is perfectly stable. Essentially, it is calcium sulfate that has been completely starved of water for millions of years. It is rock solid. However, the moment anhydrite comes into contact with even the slightest trace of water, it absorbs it instantly. It then undergoes a chemical transformation, changing from anhydrite to gypsum. When this transformation occurs, the rock physically expands, it swells, and it does not just swell a little bit, the rock can increase in total volume by up to 60%. This is not a soft, spongy expansion, it is a violent, unstoppable geological force. When anhydrite transforms into gypsum, it generates massive crystallization pressure. The pressure is so intense that it can effortlessly crush thick steel beams. It can pulverize heavily reinforced concrete tunnel linings as if they were made of glass. It can heave the ground upwards, tearing apart roads, severing utility lines, and destroying the foundations of historic buildings standing directly above it. The engineers behind Stuttgart 21 knew the anhydrite was there. They knew that roughly 17 kilometers of their vital brand-new tunnels had to be carved directly through this ticking time bomb. This meant that they had to excavate the tunnels without using a single drop of water. Traditional tunneling uses massive amounts of water to cool the drill bits, suppress the blinding dust, and flush out the excavated rock. But beneath Stuttgart, water was the absolute enemy. The crews were forced to use painstakingly slow, highly complicated dry drilling methods. The tunnels were constantly filled with suffocating, abrasive dust. Every fracture in the rock had to be mapped obsessively and injected with special resin to prevent groundwater seeping in. Despite these precautions, the threat of anhydrite never truly goes away. Even if the tunnels are perfectly dry today, their heavy concrete linings must be designed to withstand immense geological pressure for the next 100 years. A single undetected microscopic leak from a fractured pipe or a shift in the local water table could trigger swelling decades from now. They didn't just build a train tunnel, they built a pressurized concrete submarine completely submerged in a sea of rock that is constantly trying to crush it. The geological war was exhausting, expensive, and completely disrupted the construction schedule. But even after bringing the Earth to a standstill, the project was about to be paralyzed by something entirely invisible. As costs escalated to over 11 billion euros and the timeline extended well into the 2020s, Deutsche Bahn confronted a daunting mathematical reality. Remember those 8 underground platforms? The ones that replaced the 16 above-ground tracks? As the opening date approached, it became clear that the physical infrastructure could not handle the required volume of trains using traditional methods. The margin for error was not just small, it was practically non-existent. In order to save the project from immediate and humiliating gridlock, the planners decided to take an enormous and unprecedented risk. They turned Stuttgart into a vast experimental laboratory for railway software. They introduced the digital node Stuttgart. The plan was to remove traditional line-side signals completely. There would be no more red and green physical lights on the tracks. Instead, every train entering the Stuttgart Valley would be controlled by ETCS, the European Train Control System, running at its most complex level. Trains and tracks would communicate constantly via encrypted radio frequencies. The software would dynamically calculate the exact braking curves, enabling heavy, high-speed trains to run just seconds apart and maximizing the capacity of the severely restricted 8-platform station. On paper, it was a brilliant futuristic solution. In reality, however, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. They attempted to implement an incredibly complex and highly unproven digital ecosystem on top of Europe's most delayed construction site. The entire system required hundreds of existing regional and commuter trains to be pulled out of service completely and retrofitted with complex onboard computers. However, the supply chain instantly collapsed. The manufacturers simply could not deliver the required technology in time. The software itself was riddled with severe bugs, interface errors, and integration failures. As the new underground station had been designed exclusively for this digital system, there was no physical fallback option. No traditional signals had been installed as a backup. If the software did not work flawlessly, the trains could not physically enter the tunnels. This massive digital bottleneck finally killed the 2026 opening date. Deutsche Bahn was forced to admit that it could not guarantee the safety and reliability of the software. The grand opening was cancelled. The city remains tethered to the old above-ground station that it has spent over a decade trying to replace. Stuttgart 21 now stands as a profound monument to administrative failure in the modern era. It is what happens when visionary arrogance overrides basic operational logic. It is what happens when planners try to solve fundamental physical limitations with untested software. This sprawling €11 billion project has forever shattered the illusion of flawless German engineering, leaving behind a labyrinth of delayed tunnels, frustrated citizens, and a train station that simply refuses to arrive.